Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today, inshallah, we are going to completely talk about the consumer surplus and producer surplus, as well as the social surplus or social welfare. In the last class, we had an idea about the consumer surplus and producer surplus. As you see in this graph, at this price, P star, this triangle represents the consumer surplus, which is the area below the demand curve and above the equilibrium price, okay? And this is the producer surplus, which is the area below the consumer, below the price and above the supply curve. The social welfare equals this consumer surplus plus the producer surplus. Now, let's go to analyze the effect of the imposing or setting a price ceiling and the price floor on the consumer surplus, the producer surplus, and the social welfare. Okay? Sometimes the government intervene in the economy by setting a price ceiling, a price floor, and taxes. Now, we are going to study the effect of these policies on the social welfare. Okay? As you see here in this graph, let us assume that the quantity equals quantity 1 and the price is P1, which is above the equilibrium price. Here is the consumer surplus. Where is the producer surplus here? The producer surplus will be the area here. This area is, at this price, this area represents the consumer surplus. And this area represents the producer surplus, which is the area above supply curve here, below the price. So let us assume that the area B and C. Okay? As the price or the quantity here increased and the price goes down here, what do you see? The consumer surplus increases and the producer surplus increases as well. What do you see? What else? As much as the quantity increases, this is the consumer surplus here, and this is the producer surplus. What do you see? Consumer surplus increases. The producer surplus increases as well. As or at equilibrium here. This is the consumer surplus. This is the producer surplus. This is the best point for the economy. Okay? This is the optimal point, the social optimal point for the community. Okay? But let's go. The social surplus or social welfare is the summation of consumer surplus plus producer surplus. The consumer surplus plus the producer surplus. Here, as you see, welfare for the consumer and producer, and the differences between the original situation or initial situation and the changes in their prices. Let's go to the effect of a price ceiling or setting a price ceiling on the social welfare. Let us assume that the government imposed a price ceiling at PC here. The price ceiling. What do you see? Here's the price ceiling. And this is the quantity at price ceiling. Before or at equilibrium, how much is the consumer surplus? Let us analyze here the social welfare before and after imposing a price ceiling. The consumer surplus, the consumer surplus, producer surplus, and the total surplus or total welfare. We can call it social surplus, total welfare, social welfare. Before imposing price ceiling, before price ceiling, price ceiling, after the price ceiling. And let us discuss or see, check the change. Before imposing a price ceiling here, let's come back to the graph. What is the price ceiling? Sorry, the consumer surplus. The consumer surplus is the area here at equilibrium. This is the P star. How much is the price, the consumer surplus? It's represented by the area M and V. M and V. So before the price ceiling, at the initial situation or the original situation, the consumer surplus was M plus V. Here. What is the producer surplus? K, U, and W. So the producer surplus before imposing or setting a price ceiling, it was K, a plus U, a plus W. Okay? The total or the social welfare is the summation of consumer surplus and producer surplus. So M, a plus V, a plus K, a plus U, a plus W. This is the social welfare for the community as a whole before setting a price ceiling. What about the changes or when the government sets a price ceiling? What is the impact of the government intervention here? After imposing a price ceiling, here's the price ceiling. How much is the consumer surplus? The consumer surplus is the area above the price below demand curve. So where is the consumer surplus? The consumer surplus will be the area here below demand curve and above the price. M and U. Alright? So the area here, M plus U. What about the producer surplus? It's the area represented by this triangle here. Below the area above supply curve and below the price. So it equals K. The social welfare or the total surplus here. M plus U plus K. Alright? What about the changes? As you see, I can see that there is a decreasing in the welfare. But we have to check the final result. What has happened to the consumer? What has happened to the producer? To check the effect of the price ceiling on the welfare after minus before. After minus before. So I can say that here's after for the consumer, the change in the consumer surplus, M plus U minus الماينس بدخلها الجوس هذا كله هيك بتصير minus M minus V. M minus M. What is the result here? Plus U minus V. This is the consumer the final modification, the final change of the consumer surplus. So the final change will be here plus U minus V. This means that the consumer gains U and lose or lost V. Tamam? The consumer gains after imposing a price ceiling here because the price went down. So he gains U and lose or lost V. What do you see? The area U here, rectangle U, is bigger than V. This means that the gains are bigger than the loss. Okay? So as U is bigger than V, sometimes it may be smaller than. So the consumer will be, or the benefits or the welfare of consumer, the welfare gains of the consumer is bigger than the welfare loss for the consumer. This situation is good for the consumer, as the price or the social welfare for the consumer becomes bigger than the loss, so it's good for the consumer. Okay? What about the producer? Let's analyze the producer welfare or the change in the producer's welfare. To discuss or to study the impact of the government intervene here by imposing a price ceiling, we have to say that the change after minus before. K minus all of these areas. K minus U minus W. Because negative sign هي بتعدي على كل الجوز مظبوط. So K, we can say K minus K. This is after minus K minus positive U minus U minus W. K minus K, 0. Minus U minus W. So here, minus U, the result, minus U minus W. What is the summation of the social welfare here? U, positive U minus U minus V minus W. This is the net change in the social welfare due to the government intervention by imposing or setting a price ceiling. So there is a negative impact of this policy on the economy, which is the welfare loss or dead weight loss. This is the welfare loss, or it's called the dead weight loss. This equals dead weight loss. So we can say that these two triangles here, V and W, are the dead weight loss. What about the producer here? As imposing the price ceiling here, the producer lost U and W. Due to the imposing a price ceiling policy, the government or the producer, how much was the producer welfare? At equilibrium, At equilibrium, before imposing the policy, he gains this area. مظبوط؟ اللي هي خلينا نقول U W M for instance. And after imposing the price ceiling, it has become just M. So he lost U and W as explained here. Okay? So due to this policy, we can say that the producer is definitely has a loss, and the producer or the consumer, there is a positive attitude, there is a positive impact on the consumer, because here U is bigger than V. Sometimes U is less than V, so he will be harmed as well. Okay? The final conclusion here is the dead weight loss. This means that the economy lost V and W. Okay? تمام. Let's go to something else. Let's go to the price floor and the effect of the price floor policy on the social welfare. This is the original situation, and this is the consumer surplus and the producer surplus under the social efficiency or the consumer equilibrium. Okay, now we are going to impose, or we will assume that the government sets a price floor which is above the equilibrium price to protect whom? To protect the producers. The price ceiling to protect is imposed to protect the consumer. Here we are, according to our assumption, that the government imposed or sets a price, a floor which is above the equilibrium price. Okay? And we will check the effects of this policy on the social welfare. Okay? Let's go here. The government imposed a price floor at PF here, and this is the quantity at this price. Where is the consumer surplus? The consumer surplus is represented by this triangle. Well, where is the producer surplus? It's the area, as we mentioned, above supply curve, below the price. So it should be presented by this area. Suppose this is A and B. Area, this triangle A, represents the consumer surplus, and the area here, B, represents the producer surplus. Okay? Let's analyze the effects of these policy or this policy on the consumer and producer surplus. Here, as you see, so here we're talking about the price floor, PF, and after price floor, let's analyze the producer, the consumer, and producer surplus before and after imposing this or deciding this policy on the consumer and producer, and the final effect on the economy as a whole or the social welfare as a whole. Before imposing a price ceiling at equilibrium here, how much is the consumer surplus? Who can tell us? How much is, yes? A, U, and V. This is the original consumer surplus. So A, before, the consumer surplus was A plus U, plus V. What about the producer surplus? Who can tell us about the producer surplus? Yes, Tawfiq. Sorry? M plus W. Thank you. Yes. M plus W. So the social welfare or the total welfare for the community is or can be represented by the area A plus U plus V plus M plus W. Okay? What about the after change, after imposing a price floor? Who can tell us where is the consumer surplus? Yes. A, yes, it's just A. So we can say that the consumer loss is the area U and V, because the original consumer surplus was A, U, V. Now it's just A. So the consumer surplus after imposing a price ceiling is A. What about the producer surplus? Yes.
U plus M.
U plus M only. Just U plus M. So the total welfare gains, or the total social welfare after imposing or setting a price floor, is A plus U plus M. That's it. Let's check the change, the decreasing or increasing, or the change in the social welfare for the consumer surplus and producer surplus, and the final conclusion over the final result. What about the consumer? A minus U minus V. How much is the result here? Minus U minus V. What about the producer? M plus W minus U plus M minus M minus W. U plus M minus M minus W. The result, M positive M, negative M, 0. U minus W. This is the change in the producer surplus, U, positive U, and negative W, which means that the consumer loss is U and V. The consumer lost U and V, but for the producer, after imposing this price, he gains U and lost W. Lose W. So, what do you see? The consumer gains due to the increase in the price here. He added he gains additional U هنا هيك, and lost this triangle. The gap between U and W here is the net gains for the producer welfare. مظبوط؟ طيب, what about the final result? A plus U, the final changes in the community or on the social welfare, A plus U, A plus M, minus all these areas, minus A, minus U, minus V, minus M, minus W. What do you see? A with negative A, minus A, U with minus U, M, positive M with negative M. The final change is minus V minus W, which are the dead weight loss. Here's this. These two triangles represent, this triangle and this triangle represents the dead weight loss or the social welfare loss. Okay? So minus V, we can sum these areas, negative U with positive U, minus V minus W. Here we can check it. Minus V minus W are the change or the final result of this policy. Okay? Who has any problem? تمام. Let's go to examine the Effect of sales taxes. As the government impose sales taxes, it can get revenues, the government revenue tax. So, and we can say that sometimes the consumer will lose and the producer will lose as well, because the consumer will pay more and the producer will get less. Let us assume that the government decided to impose sales taxes on the services or goods. The consumer will pay more and the producer will get less, and the government will take or get share of or the government revenue tax. Okay, this will be presented here in this graph. The original situation, let's go to this graph. As you see, this is the original supply curve, and this is the original demand curve. So how much is, before imposing taxes, before setting taxes, how much is the consumer surplus before changes? A plus B plus C. This is the original situation. So I will add something here related to the government revenue tax. The government revenue of tax. And total welfare, total or social surplus before taxes and after taxes. And let's check then the changes here. I added the government to the economy here. Okay? Before, let's check the situation or the social welfare before imposing a price ceiling. Before imposing sales taxes. The original situation, the consumer gains or the consumer surplus was A and B and C. Before A plus B plus C. What about the producer surplus at original equilibrium point? Yes, sorry? D, E, F, yes, thank you. D plus A plus F. Before imposing taxes, before setting sales taxes, how much did the government get? How much is the government revenue of tax before imposing taxes? Zero, nothing, yes. So zero here. So the total social welfare before setting sales taxes equal A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus F. That's it. Now, according to our assumption, let us assume that the government decided to impose taxes, sales taxes. As we mentioned before, that tax is a cost, and this will affect the profits and the gains for the producers. So the cost of a production increases as the taxes increase, or the tax rate, or the government imposed taxes, sales taxes, the cost of production increases. The ability to produce goes down, the willingness to produce goes down, so supply decline. So supply curve shifts left from S0 to S1. What is the equilibrium, the new equilibrium point? The new equilibrium point is, let us assume it's E2. This is E1. the new equilibrium point is A2. At this point, the producer can sell the product, or sorry, the consumer pays P1, and the producer gets only P1 minus taxes. Here, we can take a vertical distance here from A2 to the original supply curve to determine the value of taxes, or the government revenue of tax. To calculate the government revenue of tax, we have to take a vertical distance between A2 to the original supply curve, which can be represented by this area here. This is the government revenue of tax. This rectangle represents the government revenue of tax. So once again, how can we determine or calculate the government revenue of tax? We have to take a vertical distance from A2 to the original supply curve, okay? And this is the sold quantity after the price, after taxes. So this is the government revenue of tax, okay? What about the consumer surplus and the producer surplus? How can we determine the producer surplus and consumer surplus? At this price here, at this price, how much is the consumer surplus? A. It's just A. What about the producer surplus? No. It's only F, because the consumer pays, okay, P1, and the producer gets this price. So at this price, the producer surplus is only F. And the government gains or took this or gets this at this price, the difference between the selling price and purchasing price. Okay? So the producer surplus is only F here. What's the government? B and D. This is rectangle and plus this. These are what? B and D are the government revenue of tax. هلا كيف عرفت؟ بدي أقول أن هاي عند كل كمية at each quantity sold, the government gets this price, this value of tax. The value of tax هي هذا هيك. الفرق بين هذا وهذا هي P1 minus taxes. This is the value the value of tax per unit. Let us assume this is 10 at this price, and here is 15. The value per unit of tax, the price per unit, or the cost per unit of tax is $5. And let us assume that the quantity sold is 50. So 50 times 5, 250. This is the government revenue of tax. Okay? Will not understand me? Is there a problem? No. Okay, so the government revenue of tax can be represented by the area B and D. So B plus D is the government revenue of tax. So the total social welfare here, after imposing taxes, equal A plus F plus D, B plus D. A plus F plus B plus D. I think there is a big decreasing in the social welfare due to the sales taxes. The consumer, let's check the consumer surplus. A minus B minus C. So what is the final result? Minus B. Thank you. Minus B minus C. A with A. So we can say that the consumer loss is B and C. هي اللي خسروا الكونسيومر لأنه the original situation for the consumer was A, B, C. Now it's just A. So the consumer's loss here is B, rectangle B, and triangle C. Okay? What about the producer surplus? The producer surplus was, the original situation was FDE. Now it's just F, so he lost D and E. Let's check it here. F with F. So minus D minus E. Minus D minus E. Here, it can be presented here. The original consumer surplus was FDE. Now it's just F, so the producer loss is D and E. What about the government? B plus D minus 0, B plus D gains. Summation of these things. Minus B with positive B. Minus D with D. So the result minus C minus E is the dead weight loss, or the loss. This is the final result of the welfare loss here for the community. Okay? So this triangle here represents the welfare loss. Okay? Type. Let's go to something else. Here are examples for, the producer surplus, consumer surplus due to, here's a practical, numerical example. Let's go to this example here. A numerical example related to the government taxes. We have the following graph. And the question is, number one, A, compute the consumer surplus, producer surplus, and the total surplus without taxes. Here is the original situation. At equilibrium price, how much is the consumer surplus? It can be represented by this triangle, okay? Which is the consumer surplus equals half times pays times height. Half times pays times height. So the consumer surplus equals half times pays. How much is pays here? It's the quantity, 100 times height, 400 minus 200, 200 equals, how much is it? 150 equals 1,000. This is the consumer surplus. What about the producer surplus? Half producer surplus equals half times pays. The same. Should be the same here. 100 times height. 200 minus 0, 200. So the producer surplus equals 1,000 as well. What about the total surplus? 2,000. Consumer surplus plus producer surplus. Now let us assume that the government imposed a tax by, number 2 here, if a $100 tax, here take it, we're going to compute consumer surplus, producer surplus, tax revenue, and total surplus, as well as the dead weight loss. Okay? Let's impose a price or a tax. Here, as you see, okay, this is the answer for the first question. We will go to impose a tax. How much is the original price? The original price was 200. Now, we will move, due to the tax, we will move it, a change here by 100. So we have a new point, this is the value of tax here. It should be 100. So we have to add 50 and 50. This is the value of tax. Okay? And this is the supply curve. S1, S2. ليش نعمله هيك يلا هيك. How much is the new consumer surplus? This is the new consumer surplus. صح؟ طيب. Area A. Half times base 75 times height 150. This is the consumer surplus. What about the producer surplus? What is it? Here we can represent it by area triangle B here. This is the producer surplus. Half times base times height. No, it's not the same here. Half times. Yes, the same. Yes. Times 75 times 150, and the government revenue of taxes here. 100 times 75. مظبوط؟ هيو اللي هو the area of this rectangle here. The deadweight loss can be represented by this area here. We can calculate the area of this rectangle, triangle, plus the area of this triangle. We can collect or to calculate the deadweight loss. Okay? Here we can see that the consumer surplus, as you see, the consumer surplus equals half times 150 times base 75 equals 5,625, and the producer surplus the same. Total revenue, the government revenue of tax equals 100 times 75 equals 7,500, and the deadweight or the total surplus here, as you see, the summation of consumer surplus plus producer surplus plus government revenue of tax. This is the total social social welfare for the economy. Okay? And the deadweight loss here is the summation of the area here for these two triangles. Okay, let's go to the relationship between the deadweight loss or the loss and the social welfare and the elasticity of demand and supply. In general, the deadweight loss or the loss and the social welfare is affected by the elasticity of supply and the elasticity of demand. So let's go to this graph. As you see, we will assume that the demand curve is in neutral, and supply, we will change the slope of supply curve or the elasticity of supply. As you see in this example or this graph, supply is inelastic. It's close to the vertical axis, so it should be inelastic. How much is the deadweight loss? This is the size of taxes here. How much is the deadweight loss? It can be presented by this area. Okay? Now let us assume that supply curve becomes elastic and demand remains in neutral. Then نعمل له تحييد. What has happened to the deadweight loss? Becomes larger here. As you see, the deadweight loss increases. Either the limited size or the fixed size of taxes. So, as you see, the more elastic supply, the more elastic is supply, the larger is the deadweight loss. Okay? What about demand? We will assume that supply is in neutral, 45 centigrade here. الزاوية تبعته 45. تمام. And here demand is inelastic. How much is the dead weight loss? It's small here. When demand is inelastic, the dead weight loss of tax is small, or the negative effects of taxes is small, because since you know that the taxes have negative impacts on the social welfare, so as much as when demand is inelastic, the dead weight loss of tax is small. But let us assume that the demand became more elastic. The dead weight loss is larger here. As you see, the more elastic is demand, the larger is the dead weight loss. Okay? يعطيكم العافية.